rewind and record all of
Well, Martin, we've been talking a lot around the movement, the neurodiversity movement, and how we're seeing polarities, we're seeing division, we're seeing expansion. It's such an exciting and very much, I would say, very different for you. When we started with Neurodiversity Foundation 8 years ago, and you started even earlier than us, you've probably
when
seen
I was a young man. Yeah,
you've probably seen quite a leap in the past few years,
yeah,
right? And so
yeah.
that for me, that gives me hope. That gives me quite a lot of hope that we're progressing in the right direction, right? That there's movement in the field. And yet, like what you also mentioned, we're also seeing quite a lot of polarities. We're also seeing quite a lot of heavy reactions to the different advocacies that we're part of. And so I'm curious, what are you sensing? What are you
Yeah,
noticing?
I see this a lot. I mean, one of the reasons, and this is something that you know we are all we're all at risk of for ourselves, is that everybody's trying to make their way in this field. And there are very few large structures that everybody is happy to work for. So if you work for in the field of insurance, then there's some big insurance, Lloyd's of London, for instance. People are happy to work for Lloyd's of London. In the field of, let's say, dyslexia awareness, not everybody's happy to work with the British Dyslexia Association or whatever. If you work in the field of autism awareness, a lot of people are not happy to work with a number of different autism companies. I mean, there are some very well-known ones, like Autism Speaks, for instance, and there's a lot of people who are not happy to work with that. And therefore, there's a lot of small players, and we're all small players. There's a lot of small players trying to make their way in the field. And because there's a lot of them, there's a certain amount of jealousy, if we're honest with ourselves, that, I want to I want to put my
Yeah.
flag down here. Um, then what you get is, as I was saying earlier, because what we do, we work in what you might call an ethical sector. Um, if we worked in IT, or if we worked driving buses, or if we worked in insurance, we're doing it for the paycheck. We're doing it because we need a job. And if somebody said, well, we're going to pay you not very much money for that, and we want you to give us everything you can, we just say, well, thanks, but no thanks, and walk away because there's no moral grip on us. But because we're working in an ethical field, we're less likely to do that. And
Yeah.
so people are more likely to take moral advantage of you, to take sort of advantage of you ethically, because they know that your breaking point is a lot further down the line. We're all willing, almost all of us, to take a little less money so that we can still do that moral thing. And that's a killer because people will take advantage of that. And we all know people who have taken advantage of that. The next thing, of course, is that because we're working in what you might call an ethical field, we're working towards some form of equity. Um, People are morally engaged with it. A lot of people are morally engaged with it. But there is a tendency when you're morally engaged with something and you have a moral position, you have an ethical position, when somebody has a different moral position, to think, well, that person doesn't agree with my morality, that person does not agree with morality. Because the whole point of my morality is that I don't think it's my morality, I think it's morality. I think that what I think is moral rather than moral just for me. Of course I do. So if somebody has a different moral perspective, a different moral position, I'm quite likely, or not I, one is quite likely to think this person is not moral. Um, and as I said earlier, there was an interesting study that showed that those people who have, as it were, strong moral reactions to, let's say, political events are less likely to be self-reflective.
Yeah. Yeah. Your amygdala is the one in charge right now.
100%, 100%. Yeah. And so what you've got is you've got a field where everybody's jostling for position, where everybody has a moral position and a moral say, where the chances of moral, if you like, moral conflict are actually quite high because people have got moral positions and they disagree with other people's moral positions, and their chances of self-reflection are a little bit lower than they would have been if they weren't so morally engaged with something. So we are working in a field where we're in danger, I'm afraid, of fragmenting. And it's always a little bit difficult if you're in a field where you're in danger of fragmenting, because what we really need is inclusivity among ourselves as much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, something I was talking about recently is the language that we use in the field of neurodiversity. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that that I'm talking about dyslexia. I'm a dyslexic man. I'm a dyslexic. I'm dyslexic. I'm a man with dyslexia. I mean, some people dislike this language. Now, it's okay to dislike the language. You know, we can't help liking and disliking things. But as soon as one person says to somebody else, you cannot describe yourself in that way because ... And then you listen to the reasons, and the reasons are seldom sort of hard and fast reasons. They're just, this is the camp I'm in, and that's the camp you're in, and we don't like each other. And as soon as there is any form of how do I put it? As soon as anybody is less inclusive to somebody else, simply because they put the word dyslexia first or second in a self-description, I mean, what do we look like to other people? I mean, come on, you know, if we're advocating for inclusion, if we're advocating for acceptance of difference, and then we don't even accept the difference in
Other, yeah.
ourselves, we've made a wrong turn along the road somewhere, I think.
I think this is the what's this? The challenge with new movements, right? We're fumbling along while advocating for ourselves.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, and we're learning along the way, and it's also that also, like, I see it as you know, when you're thinking about the feminist movement, yeah, there's just like, okay, it's one whole feminist. But then when we're talking about neurodiversity movement, then you have those you know, advocating around dyslexia, autism, ADHD.
Yeah. I mean, there's a quite a well-known I come from the city of York, which is a beautiful place. And for those people who know, I mean, we're in Pride Month at the moment. And for those people who know about some of the stories in York, I mean, there's quite a lot of sort of Pride-related stories in York. One of them is about a woman called Anne Lister. And Anne Lister used to be called Gentleman Jack. And there's a TV series about Gentleman Jack. There's a famous story, and it's not really true, but there's a famous story that Gentleman Jack married her girlfriend, again, Anne somebody, I can't remember her name, but married her girlfriend in a church called Holy Trinity Church in Goodramgate, a little street called Goodramgate in York. And to commemorate this, a few years ago, they put Britain's first and I believe only rainbow plaque. Now, to explain what this means, Britain has blue plaques. So plaque is like a little sign. And Britain has blue plaques all over the place saying, you know, in this place, W.H. Auden lived or wrote this poem, or in this place, Shakespeare lived, or so these cultural plaques. So they put a rainbow plaque up in the grounds of Holy Trinity, Goodramgate, to commemorate Anne Lister's world's first gay marriage. Whether it happened or not is another question. I mean, really, it didn't. But I mean, they put this plaque up to commemorate Anne Lister's world's first gay marriage. Fantastic story, really positive thing to do. Within weeks, different factions of the LGBT movement were going, I don't like the wording on that, you're going to have to take it down. And then they put another one up and a different faction said, no, I don't like the wording on that, you're going to have to take it. It took months to get something that people were happy with. And it was simply words. It was simply the wording. Is this wording what we want? Is this wording what we want? It wasn't the intent that people were looking at. It was whether they were in control of the wording, whether the wording suited their purposes. And this happens in almost all equity movements. As I say, you know, I'm a man, I have dyslexia. And the number of people who will say, how dare you say you have dyslexia? You're a dyslexic man. Don't shout at me. You know, I didn't mean anything bad. And then they'll say words matter. And it's true, words matter. This is absolutely true. Words matter. But actually, it's an empty phrase. The phrase words matter. I mean, if I say, hi, my name's Martin, or hi, my name's Martin Bloomfield, well, words matter. I mean, in what way? You know, so I mean, you're going to have to make a case for why these particular words matter in this particular way, more than the sort of the small level of conflict that's just been introduced. Yeah. and whether in fact intent matters more than words, or whether consequence matters more than intent,
Yeah.
or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all sorts of questions there, and the response words matter is an easier response to make because it kind of shuts down the conversation, but it doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's possible. So sometimes if I say something hurtful, that's because I've said hurtful words. Words matter. But if I'm describing myself, if I say I'm a gay man, or if I say I'm a homosexual, one of these two, well, somebody might object to one, somebody might object to the other. But if I'm genuinely describing myself and I'm genuinely honoring my own identity, for instance, then somebody else telling me that my words matter in a sort of an accusing way is a little bit unfair, I think.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we've got to watch out for how we sound to the outside world as much as anything else. And then we've got to self-reflect on how we come across when we hit these moral touch points, because there's a lot of moral touch points in the field of neurodiversity awareness.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for surfacing this. It's really eye-opening in terms of, like how we tend to already exclude ourselves in our advocacy for inclusion.
We
And
do, yeah. Yeah, there's a very good friend of mine. I wouldn't say a very good friend of mine, but a friend of mine on LinkedIn. I've met him a few times. So, we're actually human friends rather than just digital friends. And he was saying that, he uses the word neurodiversity, and some people don't like his use of the word neurodiversity. He's talking about himself, and people are attacking him for the way he talks and being quite rude sometimes about the way he talks about himself. It's yeah, you see it a lot. You see it a lot.
Yeah. And there's also even one fraction also is like, can we just go away with the labels?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Why do we have to define everything? At the same time, I'm like, unfortunately, we don't live in a society where labels do not exist.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We have to label things. We have to.
Exactly, right? If we started out as a society that don't need the labels, fine. We can say, let go of the labels. It doesn't matter.
We notice this. Let's take a great example of this. We notice this with, for instance, racism. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And in the 70s and 80s, we used language, and we all used language in the 70s and 80s, which I hope more enlightened times, but I don't know whether it's enlightened, which our modern times would look back on and say, oh my goodness, really? You said that? That's appalling. And what's happened is, I mean, part of it is to do with the evil of racism. Part of it is to do with the banality of evil. Part of it is to do with attacking people. But there is a small part that's to do with, okay, so we get rid of one way of describing people, and then automatically another way of describing people comes up. Now, if the attitudes behind that description may be positive, they may be negative, whatever, but you'll notice that there's always a new label that replaces the old label. Always. There's always a new description that replaces the old description. If the old description was evil, the new description will probably be evil as well, by the way, because it's the same people using the descriptions. In our case, if the old description is unsatisfactory, the new description will be unsatisfactory as well.
Well, for me, I just see it from a neural perspective but that's our brain categorizing things.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Right. So it's like an automatic process of, I need to make sense of this, and I need to be able to categorize it in whatever shape or form.
Absolutely. We are categorizing animals. I think that's one of the things that all animals are, but with our ability to articulate these categorizations, it works particularly for us. I mean, in a way, so when people say, let's get rid of the labels, I mean, I see what they mean, but I think it's the approach to this that we need to look at, rather than whether I can call myself a dyslexic man, or a man who has dyslexia, or a man who is dyslexic. Whatever I call myself, or if somebody says, well, no, there's no such thing as dyslexia, just say you have a specific learning difference or difficulty or disorder, or somebody else says, well, you have a learning style, or whatever it is, however people describe it. Or some people say, well, actually, you're a slow reader. Or some people say, well, it's your phonological decoding. Or some people say it's the pathway between Broca's region and Vernon. Whatever they want to say, whatever they want to say. It's at the point at which we get strident with each other. I won't say angry, because people aren't necessarily
like that word, strident. Yeah,
but it's the point at which people get strident with each other. It's the point at which positions become entrenched. Because what naturally happens is, as we kind of discussed earlier, the tendency, if you disagree with somebody on something which you think is ethically worthwhile, the tendency is to in some way think, well, they're not ethical in that case, they're not moral. And the tendency then is not to converse with them, but to demonize them.
Yeah.
So we all know it. I mean, in politics, doesn't matter which country you're in politics, one side demonizes the other side. And then when I say that, a lot of the people watching this will go, well, of course, we should do. The problem with demonizing is that you're not treating anybody like a human being anymore. And you're not treating what they say with any form of respect. Now, if we're going to have a conversation, and the only way, by the way, the only way to move the discourse forward is to have this open and self-reflective conversation. If we're going to have that, then we can't demonize people. If we're going to actually try to work out the best way possible to exist together, to advocate for ourselves and for each other and for others, if we're going to do that, then as soon as we start demonizing people, we're not looking for the truth anymore. We're looking for a victory. And that's that's a dangerous route to go down. And at the same time, we're excluding people who will no doubt be as damaged and traumatized from childhood as we are, by the way, and will have had their own histories that have caused them to think these things which we disagree with. Whether these things are truly immoral is another matter of discussion. Sometimes in politics, they might be. But within the neurodiversity world, it's unlikely that somebody has a truly unethical or immoral position. And I'm using ethics and moral interchangeably here. But it's unlikely that somebody who advocates for this kind of language or no labeling at all, it's unlikely that somebody is truly immoral here. And so if we become strident with it, if we in any degree demonize the other person, then we're dehumanizing the other person. When we dehumanize people, we don't listen to them. We don't take them serious anymore. We put them down on that hierarchy of, if you like, knowledge or competence or whatever it is. And so there is this danger that we have.
Yeah. And I'm just going back to what we advocate for anyway in neurodiversity is let's go with the platinum rule of do unto others what they would want to be done unto them.
Yeah.
And this goes with the language, yeah, of like, oh, is that your way of introducing yourself? Fine, that is the person's lived experiences. That is the person's preference.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is that. And this is why I like that word strident that you shared of like, oh, we need to be flexible as well in how we approach our advocacy. In a way that meets people where they're at.
Yeah. And it's difficult. It's really difficult because it does involve at every moment risking a kind of intellectual and ethical death, risking an intellectual and ethical sacrifice, getting rid of something that's really important in our way of thinking. Because that's what we're risking. Every time we come across somebody else with a vastly different view and they say, they say something that we disagree with, for instance. And instead of saying you're wrong, every time we say, that's interesting, tell me more. Every time we do that, we are risking sacrificing a deeply held part of ourselves. That's a scary thing to do. People don't enjoy doing that because, of course, we don't want to sacrifice the deeply held parts of ourselves, because if we did, we'd be opening ourselves up to this almost psychological, am I as good as I'd like to be, or can I respect myself in the way I want to respect myself, or can I trust myself in the way I want to trust myself at the very basic level? So opening ourselves up to saying, that's interesting, tell me more. I want to find out whether I'm wrong about this. If the thing that we want to find out whether we're wrong about is so deeply held within us, that's a terrifying thing to do.
Yeah. So much deep work, right? When we started this conversation just thinking about what we're sensing, what we're experiencing in the field, and now we're going back to, and this does not apply only to the neurodiversity movement. It applies to any justice and social equity movement.
As I say, it applies to pride. It applies to the anti-racist movement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because it is what you said is quite true. In the first place, it's a polarizing field already,
Yeah.
right? And what we're trying to um, bring emphasis here is how can we bridge the gaps
Yeah.
rather than how do we create bigger gaps.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. There was one case, and I won't say which field it was about, but it was a conversation. It was a particular conversation I'd not heard before, couched in a kind of vocabulary which was quite new to me. And what somebody said, and they said it online, and it was a friend of mine, somebody that I've known for years and supported for years, and who knows me, I think. And she said something, and it was, as I say, it was quite an interesting. I wouldn't say an interesting concept. It was a concept I wasn't quite familiar with, or I wasn't quite certain what it meant. Let's say, and the way that the language was used, I didn't know what it meant. And this is on Facebook. This is years ago. This is, when people used Facebook back in the day. And I just wrote underneath it, sorry, what does that mean? And I got so many private messages telling me that I was a hateful bigot simply for asking what something meant.
Wow.
Now, maybe they assumed that I was saying, what does that mean? What does that mean? Or something.
Yeah.
Maybe they assumed that the question, I'm sorry, what does that mean? I think I might have said, please. I'm sorry, what does that mean, please? Or something, because that's the kind of thing I'm likely to say, please. Maybe they thought that what I was saying was, that's nonsense, or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't. Maybe they did. It turns out I wasn't saying that. I was genuinely asking, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? Or I might have said, what do you mean by that, please? I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like, what does that mean? What do you mean by that, please? Something like that. And the amount of hate mail from strangers that I received simply for asking a clarification question was quite eye-opening, really eye-opening. And yeah, it caused me to reflect on the way that if you've got a strong moral position, the way that you assume other people might react to that governs the way that you the person you assume they are. So, for instance, where I was asking a genuine question of clarification, people were already vulnerable and already ready to assume that they were going to get attacked.
Yeah.
And therefore, their response is to attack back. Now, I suspect that wasn't an isolated incident, and I suspect that it wasn't isolated to that particular field of discourse. I suspect that goes on quite a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, and
you are so very true around this experience of, given that people who are advocating for justice, for change, I have either experienced oppression themselves or marginalization, so there is already intense feelings around it.
Yeah.
And this is also why sometimes I reflect on activism is broken, because it's coming from that very wounded, angry, enraged self.
Yeah. And this is a really big point, because where we want to move the conversation forward, so let's call it forward. So let's think that in some way we're going somewhere better.
Yes.
Where we want to move the conversation forwards. The best way to do that is to have an open, loving, self-reflective, and as it were, fallibilistic, that is humble enough to realize that I might be wrong, conversation. But as we've kind of unearthed, the danger is that people are less likely than we would like and this includes ourselves. I'm not putting myself above this.
Yeah.
People in general are less likely than we in general would like to have that conversation. There's more likely to be a bit of anger. There's more likely to be touch points, to be sensitive points. There's more likely that there's a greater likelihood of entrenched positions. What you get is the people with the more money, the people with greater access to technology, the people with greater access to knowledge. They're going to have more power in this conversation, and the conversation is going to be moved in one way. This necessarily means that the weaker, as it were, the more vulnerable members of that conversation are not going to be heard as much as they would like to be heard. And so the entire conversation, the entire equity conversation, is driven in a way, in some ways, by power. And when I say power, I also mean, on the one hand, some people are willing to listen and change their opinions, and other people are less willing to listen and change their opinions. So it's driven by power and power dynamics.
Yeah.
And therefore, the conversation is almost guaranteed to not drive us forward in the most equitable fashion. It's guaranteed almost to drive us forward in the interests of the strong. Mm-hmm. And we all know that, generally speaking, those with higher profiles and those with more money and those with more access to resources are more likely to drive the conversation forward.
Yeah.
But the conversation is always driven forward relative to the aims and the purposes of the people who are driving it. The more money you have, the more power you have, the more resources you have, the more different your own aims and purposes are going to be from the people at the very bottom of society. You may hope that your aims and purposes are equitable and good, but the chances are you're going to have slightly different aims and purposes. And so essentially the conversation is always going to be driven by the powerful for the powerful. And this is a deep danger there is within all, as it were, all equity conversations, because they're going to be driven by the people who begin with more.
Yes. Yes.
Some of us begin with more, some of us begin with less. Those who begin with more are going to drive the conversation more. And when they do that, they're going to drive it in their direction. And their direction corresponds with their aims and purposes. In other words, the conversation gets driven in the direction of the aims and the purposes of the haves, not the have-nots. And that's the opposite direction it should be going.
Yeah. And we started our conversation a while ago around unfortunate experiences in the field that we've been part of, unfortunately. And this is a very good example of that fractal.
Yeah.
Right, of what's happening within our organizations and how people are abusing their power and asking for less when they can actually provide for more. And so in that conversation that we had a while ago, the question that really I was leaning into of like, okay, we cannot change all of this. It's
overnight in one fell swoop. That would be great. Change it to the way I want it to be. Kind of irony there.
And then we become the oppressor as well. So there's that question of, in what ways can we lean into being part of the movement, expanding the movement in the ways that, one is also sustainable for us?
I think it's very difficult. So what we need to have, so I don't want to get too philosophical. So I'll get a little philosophical, then I get a little business guru. The philosophical bit is that in order to have a fair and equitable conversation, you're going to need some form of, philosophers would call it a discursive norm. Essentially, you're going to have some way of ensuring that the conversation is held in an equitable way, to put it in one sense. Everybody has to be able to agree that there is something beautiful that they're going for, and they're going for it in a beautiful way. One of the ways of doing that, this is the sort of the pseudo business guru thing. There's some really interesting work on the more powerful you get, the less empathic or empathetic. I don't know. Is it empathic or empathetic? I don't know.
Empathetic,
the less sympathetic, so empathetic. The less empathetic you get. And we know this. And so basically you'll get, for instance, this is one of the problems. You get union leaders, for instance, who are powerful, but if you like, they've somehow lost touch with the union memberships, that kind of thing. And we see this all the time.
Yeah.
You get, let's say in the church, you get people who get to really high positions in the Church of England or the Catholic Church or whichever religious organization, which religious denomination it is. And the chances are they'll have less empathy towards the flock than the people who are in the flock, because that's what happens. It's a natural thing. So one of the things that we can do, and we know that this works, is to create a sense of humility, to recreate that empathy. And the way to recreate that empathy, and we can talk about empathy in a little bit, what it is and what it isn't, and
Yeah.
but the way to kind of reignite that empathy is to take yourself down a peg or two. It's to get rid of the trappings of success. It's to not drive the big car. It's to not sit in an office at the top of the skyscraper while all the dogs' bodies are doing the hard work in the lower basement area. It's to go onto the factory floor and learn from the people who are on the factory floor. It's to get rid of your mitre and your scepter, and to wash people's feet. I mean, there's a very, very beautiful thing somebody said. It's like, if you have one day to live, what are you going to do? And we know that I don't mean this in a religiously evangelical way or anything, but we know that in the story, Jesus had one day to live. He knew what he was going to do. He washed people's feet. That's a tremendous thing to do. He washed people's feet. One of the most humble things. We need people to wash feet. We need the boss to wash the feet of her or his employees. I mean, sadly, mainly his employees. We know there's
the disparity between
yeah. So we need the boss to wash the feet of his employees. We need the priest to wash the feet of his flock. We need the imam to wash the feet of his congregation. We need the union leader to wash the feet of his union members. And it's a very powerful thing to do, because it takes you back into it takes you back into a framework in which empathy can happen, into a world in which empathy can happen. Because empathy, by the way, I mean, there's a lot of things we can talk about empathy. We can talk about dyadic attention. We can talk about triadic attention. We can talk about that. One of the things we can talk about is that famous thing these days, people, there still isn't proven, but seems to have some research behind it, the idea of mirror neurons.
Yes.
And mirror neurons, as we all know, is like if you have a strong, close relationship with people, let's say you're married to somebody, to a man, to a woman, whoever you're married to, and that person is sad, you'll feel sad. Now, you're not feeling a different sadness. You are sharing that sadness. If you're mountain climbing with your best friend and suddenly one of the crampons comes unstuck, that friend feels fear. You feel fear. You're sharing a fear. You're not feeling something differently. That mirroring of the other person's emotions, that's what empathy is. And the way to create the foundations for that is to bring yourself down to I don't mean to the same level in human terms, but in terms of power.
Yeah.
To bring yourself off that power pedestal, to exist in the same world as other people, to form bonds of friendship and love with other people, because that's the thing that creates the conditions for the mirror neurons, and that therefore creates conditions for empathy. And the only way to do it is to bring ourselves down, and that's if you like, I think that's the biggest takeaway that I would have.
Oh, thank you for this conversation. When I invited you to have a conversation, I knew whatever topic we would get into would be so relevant. I just didn't realize this is going to be this relevant. In the context of life in general and how we're moving through life. We know there's quite a lot of political imbalances that are happening all across the globe. There's a lot of polarities, there's a lot of wars, there's a lot of hatred, and this message of seeing each other in Filipino psychology, we call it kapwa or pakikipagkapwa.
Uh-huh.
We see each other in our shared humanity.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing from you is to go back to that, of go back to love, go back to
100%.
being a place, in a place of curiosity to be able to see the shared humanity.
Love is the only thing that brings people together. It's the only thing that mends broken bridges. You can't order a broken bridge to be mended. You have to love, and that's the only way you can do it.
Hmm. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And looking forward to seeing and hearing what gets processed after this video. So for those who will be watching it, take the time, let it simmer, let it really give it space. We've covered quite a deep topic, and hopefully it steers, a new pathway or pathways in how we can approach this work that we're doing. And lastly, Dr. Martin, any way that they might reach you, or if they would want to ask for your services, where
Yeah.
can.
So maybe we could put it at the bottom of the screen, Beyond Inclusion, beyond-inclusion.com. So I'm a co-founding director of Beyond Inclusion, and we do lots of inclusion work in education and business, and we work all around the world. And I'm proud to be a part of it because we take a holistic approach. We take neurodiversity, we take ethics, we take safeguarding, we take complex needs and communication needs. We take all of them because you can't look at one without looking at the other. So we have experts in all of these fields. And yeah, I think I only work with these people because I see the love that comes from them.
Thank you very much.